Hello everyone, I'm Keith Plattfoot with Kviation, and today we're going to look at logging a simulator session in Smart Logbook. So we're starting out here on the main screen of the app. You can see that we have one flight logged so far, just 0.5 hours of time there. You may also notice here at the bottom that we have a flag on the currency tab. So if we switch to that tab, you can see that we have a rule here defined for tracking our instrument currency. And you'll see that at the moment, we are not current. Now, if we go into that rule, you can see that the instrument currency here, as defined by the FAA, requires 6 instrument approaches and 1 holding procedures in the last 6 months. Now, let's imagine that we wanted to get this currency back again. And we've decided to log some instrument approaches in a simulator, which satisfies the FAA's requirements under certain conditions. So let's see how we would do that in Smart Logbook. Let's go back to the main screen. Jump back to the Flights tab there. And let's begin logging a new entry. So we're going to tap the plus at the top just as if we were logging a new flight. Now when the flight editor opens, we're going to tap New Flight at the top, and we're going to change this into a simulator entry. So we tap that, we choose Simulator from the menu, and you'll see that the editor is now reconfigured to support logging a sim session instead of a real flight. So most of the fields are still here. You'll notice that our durations have changed. So for example, we no longer have a total duration, but we do have this new simulator duration, which is where we're going to log our sim time. We still have takeoff and landings and some of the other fields. So let's go ahead and fill in this simulator session now. Now let's say that we did spend about an hour working on some of those simulated approaches. So let's put 1 hour in this field. Okay. And let's go down here to approaches now and get those simulated approaches logged. So we're going to tap Add Approach. And let's say that we just logged a bunch of, let's say, RNAV approaches to do this. So we've got the RNAV approaches there. Let's tap that entry and bump up the number of approaches to 6. Okay, so we've now logged our approaches. Now, as you may recall, we also need to log a holding procedure. Now, this field is not turned on by default, but if we go down here to Add and Configure fields at the bottom, we can turn that field on. So I tap that, I tap More Fields, and then I check the box for holds and tap Done. So now when I return back to the flight editor, I've got the holds field, so let's go ahead and add 1 required hold there that we did in the sim. You'll also see while we're down here that we do have a remarks field, just like we do for flights. So let's go ahead and just add a note here saying that this was to get our instrument currency. Okay, now we're going to go back to the top for a moment. We've got all of our required fields entered here, but you'll see at the top we also have the aircraft model field. Now, even though we didn't fly in a real aircraft, it's often useful to populate this field with a model that represents the simulator, and I'll talk about why later. So let's tap the aircraft model field. And this brings us to our model list. We just have, at this point, just the 172 for our previous flight. So we're going to tap plus at the top to add our simulator model. So let's go ahead and enter those details now. Now this was let's imagine we used a Redbird simulator, in particular the FMX model. So we type the model ID up there at the top, and this is made by Redbird. Now to mark this as a simulator, we're going to scroll to the bottom of the field of the editor here, and check the box for simulator/training device. And when we do that, we're going to have a few more fields added, one of which is simulator type. Let's tap that field, and you can see here we have a number of options. We have the FFS, FTD, and ATD. Now these are all recognized simulator types by the FAA. In this case, we want to choose ATD, and there we go. And let's go ahead and tap Done now, and you'll see that this has now added the aircraft model to our simulator entry. Now it's important, I want to mention that you don't want to log simulator entries using the real aircraft model. If you're going to populate the aircraft model, do make sure that is, in general, it's better to log that as a separate model, just so that you can keep those separated more easily from your real flights. Now, you will be able to, in Smart Logbook, filter between real flights and sim sessions in a number of different places, and we'll take a look at that later in the video, but just wanted to call that out while we're on this screen. So let's go ahead and save the simulator entry now. I'm going to tap Done. You can now see that showing up in our list of entries here. And let's go see how this looks on the Totals tab. So I'm going to go down and switch to the Totals tab. And you'll see that by default, we actually don't see those approaches or that sim time on this screen. And the reason that is because this screen by default, as you can see down here, this is filtered by only showing our flight time. But we can easily change that by tapping Filter up here at the top. So let's tap Filter. And you'll see the first option here is Entry Type, which is currently set to flights. We can tap that. And we can easily change this to all entries. Now when we now return to the total screen, now you can see we're seeing our real flight time here under Pilot and Command, as well as our simulator hour there, and also we now have those approaches that we flew in the sim. So these are all showing up now together. Now we actually need to do something very similar for our currency. So if we switch over here back to the Currency tab, you'll see here that the instrument currency is still showing up as not current. Now the reason that is again because by default this rule is filtered to only include flights. This can be easily fixed. We can tap Edit at the top right, and this brings up the currency rule editor. And if we tap the filter field in this, down here at the bottom, we can see that that is also set to flight. So let's tap Entry Type again. And let's also change this to all entries. All right, and we return back to our rule. We're going to save that. And now you can see that we see our 6 instrument approaches, our hold, and the currency is now showing up as current. So perfect. Now there's one additional aspect I want to cover when it comes to logging sim time, and that is printing. So the way that sim time is handled kind of varies depending on what type of print format you're using. So let's take a look at a few of those now. Now to print in Smart Logbook, we're going to access that from the More tab, and we're going to jump to Printing and Reports here at the top. Now, if you print it in Smart Logbook, you'll know that there's several different formats. We have a few FAA formats and a few other countries' formats as well. So let's take a look at, let's start with the Jeppesen Basic format. Now, the Jeppesen Basic format, if we look at the printout here, we can see that we see our entry here showing up for the time in the FMX sim. And if we look at page 2, you'll notice here that there is a dedicated column for Flight Simulator, and that is where that 1 hour of sim time shows up. You'll also see that over here we have our instrument approaches and our holds showing up in the appropriate columns there. Now you'll also notice that where we don't have time is here in the total column, right? Because this only is for real flight time, and so that 1 hour is excluded from this column because when we logged the entry, as you recall, we did not actually add the total duration field to our flight. So it's not showing up here when we print either. Okay, so now let's take a look at another format. Let's take a look at the EASA format. So this is the European format, and if we take a look at the European format, they actually have a set of dedicated columns here for SIM, and that is going to be here on page 2. So if you look over here in column group 11, you can see the entry that we made here for the FMX, the 1 hour of SIM time. There's our remarks. And if you go back to page 1, you know, as with the Jeppesen format, that 1 hour does not appear here in column 6, which tracks our total flight time, because of course it was time in the sim. Moving on to the Transport Canada format, we take a look at that format here. You can see here on page 1 that we do have the entry up here for the FMX, but that time again does not show up here in the grand total, which is still just the 30 minutes of flight time from that first flight. If we look at page 2, you can see that the sim time actually just shows up right here in these last 2 columns under the instrument group. So we have both the sim time of 1 hour and we have the number of IFR approaches as 6. So again, the sim time is kind of, you know, segregated from the rest of the flight time, and it's only showing up here in these specific columns. So lastly, let's take a look at another FAA format, and this is the Form 8710-1, which is used for IACRA reporting purposes. Now the flight time here is kind of grouped in a couple of different ways. Each row here represents a different category of aircraft. And so, for example, we have the first one here, the airplanes row, and that's where we're going to find that 0.5 hours of actual flight time from the flight that we logged. The simulated time is actually going to show up here at the bottom, here in the ATD row. Now this is why, as I mentioned earlier, it's often useful to create a simulator model and to specify what that is, whether that's an FFS, FTD, or ATD. And this is one of the reasons why is for printing reports such as this, where those times are kind of broken out this way. And lastly, I will just mention that Smart Logbook also supports the DGCA format for printing. Now this one by default does not include any areas for logging sim time or for recording the sim time there. So you're not going to see it by default. If for some reason you do need to print a version of the DGCA logbook and you do want to include those sim entries, what you're going to have to do is basically log that simulator entry just using a normal flight record, not changing it to simulator. And basically just log exactly the times that you want to be included. So for example, you may need to remove the total duration if you want to log that and have that show up in the printout, but not have that time included in the total duration there. So just in case you need to do that, that's how that can be done. But that about covers logging simulator sessions in Smart Logbook. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out at feedback@thesmartlogbook.com. Thanks.